This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so this is the January 9th, 2023 Virginia Mac Users Group meeting, and our guest speaker tonight is Adam Engst, who's the editor publisher of Tidbits and a long-time Mac journalist. And we're so pleased that he's been willing to join us as our guest speaker tonight. Adam really knows all things Apple and is quite an authority on this and has a lot of off-the-record inside contacts and industry-wide contacts and everything. So he's very knowledgeable. I'll turn it over to you, Adam, to give your opening remarks, and we'll have questions and answers following that.
Sure, and actually, I should say that people should feel free to raise your hand or speak up if you have questions about anything I'm talking about. I do not have like a super prepared speech that I got to get through before we take questions. So let's we can have a nice conversation about this stuff. And I mean, I guess actually, let's start off with do people actually know what Tidbits is? We've been doing this for almost 33 years, but if you don't, we publish weekly or on our website now, the newfangled website. We predate the web, but we still think of ourselves as a weekly newsletter. And we've been covering Apple stuff ever since. So, yeah.
Bob.
I would add that the takes have links spread throughout them because they're talking about topic A, but the links tend to be, and if you'd like more on this subject, then there's a link to something you've written, and I just wanted to compliment you on those because I tend to rarely pass up those links because I
Ah.
find them very useful.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it was an interesting thing. So I mean, just to delve into a little bit of history, this is somehow partly how Bob and I know each other. I have a degree from Cornell University. I graduated in 1989. I was in the College Scholar program, majoring in hypertextual fiction. And so I've actually been doing or working on linking stuff since the late 80s. And so it was kind of fun when they actually invented the web and the whole thing caught up with what I was doing in the 80s. And so it's been really interesting over the years to figure out like sort of what's an appropriate amount of additional linking of where you're actually taking your text and you're making it better by bringing in appropriate resources. Footnotes on steroids and making it super easy. It's just great. But simultaneously, you see a lot of people just kind of linking willy nilly, and then it's just no fun. So yeah, we try pretty hard. The other thing about having started Tidbits in the 80s is that we have a bad case of professionalism wannabes. When we started this, I had no background in tech journalism or anything like that, and my wife is actually a communications major at Cornell, so she did have some, but we were, in our early 20s, and so we were desperate to come off like professionals. And so we worked really hard on editing and, making sure everything was accurate and stuff like that, all of which seems to have fallen by the wayside in the modern internet. Caring that things are right just doesn't seem to be a thing anymore, and people are much more interested in being having attitude, or being fun to read or whatever it is, and actually getting their facts right or their spelling correct. So, but in Tidbits you will find everything spelled correctly, I certainly hope. We work very hard on that, and as I said, all the facts should be correct, because if they're not, I tell you about it the next week when I discover they weren't. People always tell me if I get something wrong. So, all right. Well, it's what I thought I'd actually do tonight, and as I said, this discussion can go in all sorts of directions. But I wanted to talk about some of the things that we've been covering, in the last few weeks or months, that frankly were just more interesting to me. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and we're just like, yeah, okay, fine, we got to talk about it, but it's not that interesting. But there have been a few stories in the last little while that I'm just like, wow, that's really neat. Might not always be good neat, but it is neat. So I am curious, how many people here use a password manager like 1Password or LastPass or Dashlane or something like that? Why don't you raise your hands? Oh, not a lot of password managers, a little bit here. Okay. So
think
I
for
will
my
say,
wife's computer, I need to get it untangled.
yeah, okay. I will say I generally recommend password managers, especially 1Password these days, as I'll talk about, because the really big news that happened right before Christmas was that LastPass, which is used by millions of people, suffered a very severe security breach in which all of their customer data was stolen by the attackers. And that includes all the passwords to all of their users' websites and things like that. That sounds really bad, and it is really bad, but it's actually not quite near as troubling as you might think because all the data was encrypted. And so I shouldn't say that, all the important data like usernames and passwords was encrypted. And so if people used a strong enough master password, their data is probably impossible to decrypt. The attackers would have to have, you know, well, frankly, they'd have to have incredibly powerful computers and more time than there is in the universe. So to decrypt this stuff, I mean, encryption theory is kind of fascinating, and just how long it takes to do these things. So, but nonetheless, this was the first time a major password manager has suffered a breach of this magnitude, and it's gotten a lot of people paying close attention to it. So, if there are no LastPass users here, I won't go into too many details, other than to say that that 1Password, which is usually the most popular password manager on the Mac, is it suffers very few of the, or it doesn't suffer any, as far as we know, any of the same problems that LastPass does. Yeah.
Bob?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was unmuting myself. Uh, you said it's the most popular. What I wanted to know, Adam, is what do you use?
Well, I still currently use LastPass, and I am not wild about that fact. I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? Like the attackers stole the data. So the data is gone. You can change anything you want now. It doesn't matter. That data is in the hands of bad guys. However, my master password is very strong. It's long enough. The important thing is that no password should ever be less than 12 characters. And frankly, more is better. So 13 characters, yeah, not terrible, but if you can go to 17, 18, 20, much better yet. Yeah, Bob.
What do you consider that optimum? I understand you're saying it should be at least 12, but
Right.
if you want to have a really strong password, what's the number that you would suggest?
It's hard to say specifically because it's not the raw number of characters that matter. So imagine, for instance, that your password is the number two repeated 100 times. Very long, but very, very, very weak, right? Um,
Yeah.
so there's a concept in security called entropy. And the higher the entropy of the password, the harder it is to guess with these high-powered cracking machines that the attackers have. And one of the things, for instance, is one way of making a password, and this is actually not a bad way, is what's called, well, there's no dumb names for it, but basically you come up with just normal words. So you might say, window, calendar, light, shot glass, water bottle, something like that. And you just string them together. And in that, when you just use dictionary words, the magic number is about 28 characters. So dictionary words, very easy to guess, right? But if you put enough of them together, it becomes very, very hard to crack a password like that. So if you're just going to use random numbers, letters, symbols, making sure you use upper and lowercase, I frankly think you're probably fine in the 16 to 20 range. So, um, but of course, there's something important to note here. This is why I recommend a password manager is you should not know or be able to type the vast majority of your passwords. If they're in your password manager, it will do the entering for you, and you can have it make nice, random secure passwords for you. All my secure passwords in LastPass are 20 characters long. So, those, if one of those were stolen, it's completely safe. So, yeah, question
Adam,
from
Your,
Steve
Stephen.
your
Ferber
sense,
raised
your
his hand.
senses of
Steve?
past
Yep.
phrases are all right.
I'm sorry, was that Steve? Could you say that again?
Past phrases are fine.
Past phrases are fine as long as they're long enough. And as I said,
Mhm.
that 28 character number is in there. So, 4 or 5 or 6 words that you remember would be good. Now, there's sort of two ways to think about this. What happened to LastPass is the data was stolen. And so the attackers have it and can just hammer it. That's called a brute force attack. And so by a brute force attack, takes a long time and it's hard, but they have a lot of time and they can do it. The other kind of attack is what's called a targeted attack, and that's if, let's say you're an important, interesting person, and someone can try to figure out your password. So a passphrase, if someone knew me and they're like, oh, he's probably going to use like, names of penguins because he's a penguin fan, or something like that, they could be more likely to guess it. So if you're going to come up with a passphrase, you want to make sure you're protecting against both those brute force attacks and the targeted ones. So you want to make sure that no one who knows you could guess your phrase as well as the attacker who doesn't know you. Yeah, question.
Steve,
Bill.
Um,
Oh, sorry. Bill?
okay,
let's
I
let
kind of go
Steve.
part. I'm sorry.
Uh,
I
Steve had
sort of
his
go
hand up for
partway
a
in
long
between
time.
because what
Yeah.
I do
Hi.
is I use a random number to access a book, and then I use a phrase out of the book.
That's a good, strong way to do it. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you've already answered this about past phrases, but now when you say a string of words, I presume that means random words that have no relationship to each other, as opposed to say a lyric from a song, that goes on for.
Yes. Yes, that is a good
So
point.
in other words,
It
is it easier to have it totally random or something that's easy to remember? If I remember a particular song, uh, that adds up to 25 letters or whatever.
So you don't want the words to be related as in a sentence. So, four score and 20 years ago, blah blah blah, like the first, words of the Gettysburg
Right.
Address. Not a good passphrase.
Okay.
Similarly, a lyric from a Beatles song, something like that. Not a good passphrase. However,
Like you were
um,
saying, uh, randomness is going to help you with in this.
right. And remember, random from the perspective of someone thinking about you. So, for instance, you could have your favorite song title, your favorite movie, the cat who you had when you were a kid, the person you had a crush on in high school, their first name. Those have nothing in common, and as long as it's long enough, have sufficiently high rand entropy to be safe, and no one's going to guess them because it's too many
Mm,
things about you to guess that no one's going to know.
If you need
yeah,
a
that makes
reliable source of random word generation, you can just do any quote from Donald Trump.
that's a good one.
So yeah, and so the important thing is that with a passphrase is that you're going to remember it. So there is a technique for creating these things called diceware, and they do something a little bit similar to what Bill was suggesting, where you roll dice. Actually, and it has this list of, I think, I don't know, 7,000 words or something, and you roll the dice, and that tells you which words to pick. Very, very secure, but you then have to remember these 5 completely unrelated random words that have no meaning to you. So, in my mind, not as helpful as something which has meaning to you, such that you're going to remember it. So, but any of it. So that's the thing, is you don't need to know very many of these passwords. Your master password for your password manager, that's one of them. Your Apple ID password, that's another one of them. The password to your email If you use Gmail, for instance, your Google password should be a really strong one. Those are the kind of critical ones because those are the ones you occasionally have to type. And if you don't ever have to type it manually, if you can always use your password manager, 1Password, whatever, then hey, 20 character random password, go nuts. Like I said, I literally could not tell you what 95% of my passwords are. I would have to look them up. And that's the best way it should be done. Yeah, Bill.
Sure, since I use the random access phrase, I've got the numbers coded into an Excel. But after that, I usually let um, Keynote find long passwords for me. So in
Mm-hmm.
effect, it's like each account has its own long password that I've uh, ginned up. But after that, then I usually let Apple figure out long strings for me. It's
Okay. So one thing, are you storing those on your computer in Excel? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're stored on the computer, but they
So
are
so
presumably behind the access password to the account.
for the computer itself, yes.
Yeah.
So that's good but not great, in
Mhm.
the sense that, if someone were to guess your account password, they would have access to everything, not just on the computer, but all your accounts too. So one of the things
Mm,
about password managers is that they encrypt that data on your computer so that even if someone got your account password, they wouldn't be able to access all of the hundreds of saved accounts that you have. So that's a thing to keep in mind.
well, they can't get everything because I use the Apple business of I have an admin account, and I do all my work in other accounts, and so
That
you'd have
that
to
can be
track.
that can help too. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Judy
okay,
Judy
Judy.
Morris is next.
The one thing we talk about is these master passwords that
Hmm.
you really need to know.
Yeah.
What is a safe place to put them?
In your head, hopefully. Um, so
But some of the
seriously,
random ones are pretty hard to remember.
oh, you can't remember the random ones. That's
Right.
why you have an app. I mean, keep in mind we're computer users, right? This is job for a computer.
Yes.
But the ones that you have to remember, you can use the passphrase approach, which is good. And one thing that I would encourage you to do is to write these things down and store them like in a safe deposit box. Somewhere where you stored like those super important papers that if something happened to you and people have to use, that's
Okay.
those kind of passwords are the same level of security and same importance. Um,
So they
another
actually belong on paper.
Yeah, not on your desk in your top drawer or something,
Right.
but yes, on paper in some secure location. If you have a safe, you said use a safe deposit box, something like that. So that's very important. And you also notice that a lot of services have like what are called like account recovery options or things like that. Same thing, store those in that kind of secure spot. So, all right, Stephen
Lee Ferber.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of the Safari generated passwords?
They're good. I mean, I don't use them personally, but password generators that are usually a totally fine thing to say. I mean, to use. I can't. I don't know of any that are problematic. The only thing I'll say is that you have to make sure the settings for the password generator are doing what you want. And this is actually one of the things that bothered me about LastPass recently. And I thought it used to be different, but I can't quite prove it. Which is that when it generates a password for me, it defaults to 12 characters. I don't want any of my passwords to be 12 characters. I want them to be 20 characters. And so I have to change that number each time, and I have to select that I want symbols in there. It's not, for whatever reason, it doesn't remember my settings. And so that including symbols and making it 20 characters gives you a much stronger password. So yeah, Judy.
One other thing that I thought about is I had friends visiting from Italy and they were trying to log into their accounts from Italy, but the symbols on the Italian keyboard are not in the same place as the symbols on the US keyboard.
Oh, okay,
So
yeah,
that was something to keep in mind if you are going to be traveling out of the country and not have your own computer, is to either know where those symbols are or don't use those symbols.
yeah. This is one of the advantages of the passphrases because you don't have to use symbols. You just use enough
That's
normal
true.
normal words.
Well,
Um,
a lot of accounts, though, they say you've got to
mhm.
use a letter, you've got to use a capital
Yeah,
letter, you've got to use a number, and you've got to use a symbol. So,
you are absolutely correct, and that is, I mean, on the one hand, it's good, like don't let people make bad passwords. On the other hand, it doesn't allow you to use a password that is secure but doesn't meet those criteria. One of the standard way of doing those, if you're like you want to use words, is you just do the simple substitution of like a one for an L, or if the word for is in there, you do a numeral for instead of FOR, that kind of thing. So you can do just one or two of those to get your proper characters in. But you actually brought up a really interesting other point, which is traveling internationally. I always encourage people to use two-factor authentication on their most important accounts. So with two-factor authentication, you type your username, you type your password, and then it says, "Okay, I've just sent you a code," and you get the code in an app or it texts it to you. Well, if it texts it to you and you're in another country and your phone isn't receiving texts, you are, stuck. And I've heard lots of people running into that because you get a SIM in a different country or a different plan, your numbers change. So that's something that can be a real issue when you're traveling. All right, we good on all that right now? Okay, so the big thing that if you when you're looking at password managers, and as I said, I do recommend 1Password, but there's an interesting technique that 1Password uses, and actually Apple uses with iCloud Keychain too, and that is you come up with your password, right? And that password's good. You got a master password. It should be still a good long master password, but then what 1Password does is they give you a secret key as well, and then they entangle the two to actually create the encryption keys that do the work. And what that means is that even if your master password were stolen or cracked or something, it's not good enough because that secret key, which is something that 1Password, like again, they give you on paper and you put in your safe deposit box, that you need basically that second factor, that second key. Apple does the same thing, but they build it into your devices. So you'll notice when you do certain things, like you have your Apple ID on all this, but Apple periodically like asks you to enter your passcode for your device or things like that. And what they're doing there is they're using the device passcode to entangle with your master password and make it even stronger yet. So even if the data is stolen, like it was for LastPass, there's just no way that the master password, if it were too short, could allow your data to be decrypted. So always look for some sort of independent way of protecting a master password when you're picking a password manager, or just use 1Password because it's good. Oh, and that was the other thing I wanted to say. Actually, it reminds me when you're talking about typing in Italian, European keyboards being different. We have to type on iPhones and iPads now. And particularly with the iPhone, it's hard to switch keyboards, right? From numbers to letters and to symbols and things like that. So if you're coming up with a password that you're going to have to type on an iPhone, make sure you're not switching keyboards more than you have to. So, you don't want to put a symbol in, and then a letter, and then a number, and then a letter, and then a symbol, or you're just going to spend so much time switching between keyboards it'll make you absolutely crazy. So, you just put a little bit of thought into it. You can bundle the symbols and the numbers together, so that you're only switching keyboards once, and that'll still be equally as strong, and will make it a lot easier to type. So in any event, that's the kind of the big news. The big news that has been making the rounds in the tech world over Christmas. LastPass was fairly good about telling people about it, or it seemed like it was, but you could tell they had their PR people involved because they released the news, I think, on, I don't know, December 22nd, when, let's face it, most people are not paying attention. So, you know, yeah, it's bad. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, it's probably not like, company's going to go under bad, but it's certainly, this is really, really problematic for the entire company, and they will have to change something significantly if they want to stay in business, I suspect.
Does
But
Safari use keychain to generate its passwords, or is there a
yes.
separate password generator?
No, yep. Safari is built using the iCloud, or the Apple's keychain password generator. It generates good passwords. So this is a good thing to bring up. In the last, I forget, year or so, Apple has introduced. They have this interface, which it's sort of hard to talk about because it's just called passwords. So there's an item in passwords in settings in iOS and iPadOS, and there's a passwords preference pane in macOS, and Safari ties into it as well. And what that really is just a front end to what we've always had on the Mac, which is something called iCloud Keychain. And so that's great, and it actually works really well if you use Safari. That's the problem with iCloud Keychain, is that you can't use it with other web browsers. And so as long as you're using Safari, there's actually no harm in using it at all. It's a very well done system. It's well protected. It's well designed. All of that. But you are stuck to using Safari, and that's kind of annoying if for whatever reason you want to use Chrome or Firefox or Brave or one of the other web browsers. And I actually was helping a friend with this the other day. It's actually entirely reasonable to want to use other web browsers sometimes because we log into so many accounts, right? And this friend of mine, he's a teacher, and he's setting up a club, a running club. And so he has multiple Gmail accounts that he needs for these different things. And it's really hard to kind of, flip between Gmail accounts and Google logins on the same computer or the same browser. And so I was like, I was telling him that he should definitely use different browsers, because that's, makes it a whole lot easier if you're logged in, in one account in Safari and one account in Chrome and one account in Firefox. So when you can't access your iCloud keychain stuff in Chrome or Firefox, that's a little annoying at times. So that's the only downside, Bill, of using the Safari interface and the macOS and iOS passwords approach to things. All right. Any more questions about passwords, or should we jump to a completely different topic? All right. So for the next topic, I'm going to actually go to my. I wish I could do this yet, but we're not quite there. How many people have heard about ChatGPT over the last few weeks? Yeah,
I have.
a few. Okay. So
Yep.
this
In
is
fact, I've been playing with it.
Excellent. Yes. Chat GPT, if you Google it, it's literally CHAT, G is in Google, P is in P is in pierogi, and T is in Tom. But what Chat GPT is it's an artificial intelligence chatbot. So you can actually type to it in normal language, and it will reply to you with extremely respectable English and really shockingly good answers. I mean, this thing is impressive. Um, and it comes out of a company called OpenAI, and they've done some of the most impressive AI related things of late. And it really set the world on end, because I mean, well, sort of the initial thing was, wow, middle school essays are a thing of the past, because you could literally tell it, write me an essay about separation of powers and John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, and it will, and it's actually not too bad. The only problem is it may not be right, because what ChatGPT is doing is it's actually when you ask it to do something, it's picking, basically starting to it's like taking a word, and then it's matching what words in this incredibly huge corpus of text from the internet, what word comes next and next and next and next. So it's actually a pattern matching machine. It's not even doing looking data up. It's just figuring out which word comes next in English. And it's so good that, as I said, it reads perfectly. So this has been we've actually started to see people saying, well, this is like, who's going to ever write stuff again? Well, the answer, of course, is people who want to write something new, because it can't actually write anything new. It can only, put together the words that have been, as far as this algorithm, commonly put together in the past. But what turns out is kind of funny is you can say, I did this. This was shocking. I said, write me a rental contract. So you've got an apartment that you want to rent to someone, you want a contract. I said, write me a rental contract. And you know what? It did. And it was totally fine. Because simple rental contracts, there's a ton of them on the internet. It knows perfectly well how to start, it figures out what a rental contract is. It starts the words, and then boom, the rest of it all comes out. So this stuff
Well, I
is
think that
really, really
shows
impressive.
what lawyers have been doing for many centuries, but how are you going to use it to write tidbit articles?
Well, so that's what I was sort of going with this, is that it's really interesting when you say, because I did this. I said, because I'd written an article about this a while back. I was like, write an article about the best Apple laptop for a college student. And it actually, in this case, it got the answer right, which is a MacBook Air, because MacBook Air is the best laptop for most college students. And what it wrote was entirely coherent, and nothing wrong with the spelling or the grammar or anything like that. But it had no detail, and it had no context, it had no comparison. So when you compared what it wrote with what I had written, it was, night and day. Because what I'm writing is, like, oh, the MacBook Air is an ideal laptop for a college student because of its combination of power and price and et cetera, et cetera. In comparison, the MacBook Pro is more expensive for no more performance and blah 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 blah. My stuff had detail and context and comparison, whereas it simply made statements. The MacBook Air has a great screen and a good keyboard. Why, yes, it does. How do I evaluate that? Like, as a reader, it gave you nothing. So it was a tremendously interesting exercise. And but that said, if what you want is, in essence, canned text, and frankly, there's a whole lot of that on the internet, people are going to start doing this with ChatGPT. One of the really fascinating things that you can do is, which is kind of scary, is that my mother, who Bob knows actually, uh, quite likes doing little roses are red kind of poems and birthday cards, and she's very good at them. And so we've all taken, our family has taken to doing this after she started it. But they can be kind of hard for, when you're trying to, make your own, roses are red kind of poem. And so you can ask ChatGPT to write you a poem, like roses are red, about some topic. So I mean, I was just goofing around. I like, I told it to write me a poem about werewolves fighting zombies, in the roses are red style. And you know what? I got like 6 verses of, zombies versus werewolves. It mostly rhymed. I mean, it made a couple of slightly dubious rhymes and whatnot, but it was pretty impressive. And so, again, it's going to change the world. It's not right there just yet, but you can see the writing on the wall.
To me, the
Yeah.
biggest application for that is the Cornell Media Relations Department, where Cornell tries to avoid having faculty or administrations make quotations available to reporters, and instead you can just go to Chat and it will generate vacuous quotations.
Very likely. Max, what have you got?
Hasn't the company just announced that they're going to make part of that application um, feature where you can determine whether or not it was written by that application, so that
Yeah.
People are trying to use it for essays in college or in maybe in elementary school. The instructors will be able to determine whether or not it was generated with that application.
I I have heard something about
The
that. I
chat,
haven't
the
seen it
Prince
yet.
that was quoted today on the iPhone is having done something like this, a detector.
Yeah. I haven't seen what I haven't seen the specifics of that, but yes, that said,
And
it's
here,
going to be tricky because you can
mhm,
pretty, I mean, like again with my poems, you can just like, oh, this is a good start, and then change some words,
mhm.
so text is really easy to do that with. So I mean, I think what it's the other thing that's been kind of interesting, and we've seen this technology being used actually is in programming, because computer code, as it turns out, follows all these patterns too. And so there are actually people using this stuff to write code, not that's difficult code, and it's not even necessarily getting it 100% correct, but it's a good shortcut to get started for certain things. And so in some ways, the best way to think of this is a little bit like what Bob was saying. Part of the reason why contracts all read the same is because lawyers copy them from each other. Once you've got one rental contract, you don't need to rewrite a new one from scratch every time. And so it's in essence what ChatGPT is doing is it's showing you that certain things are really common. And just like you could go out and then Google and say, find me a rental contract and download one, you can ask ChatGPT to write one, and it's probably going to get basically the same text. So, you can almost think of it more as a search engine. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I actually used to have a wife who was uh, a legal secretary, and they would just say, "Oh, get the mag card for this kind of a document," and she'd throw it out and it would spit it out. So a lot of that is so repetitive. It's
Yeah.
it's not really that creative. But we, there there has been this problem of plagiarism in universities where they have this software to check and see, has this been written by Shakespeare or the guy down the hall, and that. So there should be a version of that which they can put into their own programming, and
And
clearly.
it's entirely likely. I mean, one of the things that you'll notice when you start playing with this. So, for instance, I had it. I was playing with. We were discussing whether or not it could write in the style of certain authors. And the answer is not real well, actually. It was better with genres. So if you told it to like write like a 1940s detective, so you get kind of
Right,
film, noir style, it was better at
right.
that. But if you just changed like in the style of, it wrote the same thing every time. And so it just changed some of the words around the edges to make it interesting, to have the style. So I think you're right that probably software will frankly be pretty easy to say, oh, I'm gonna send the prompt to ChatGPT again and then compare against this article that I was just handed and see how close they are. Because even if someone does change a few words, it's still going to be pretty similar, if they have not changed many words. Uh,
Yeah.
so any event, it's definitely, I think one of those situations where, and OpenAI did this. This is the same group that came up with DALL-E. If you remember when that was, I think that was about a year ago. Which is the DALL-Es where you can say, make me a picture of an astronaut riding a horse, and with penguins flying by in the sky, and it will do that. And so, you know,
Yeah.
that DALL-E and the things that came after it, Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and things like that, really have caused a lot of soul searching on the part of like, well, what is creativity and what is originality? Because on the one hand, like with those, is you can say, do me, write me, make me a picture in the style of Picasso, and it will do it. And is that copying, plagiarism? But simultaneously, what all the greatest artists always did in the past was they went and copied other artists for years and years. I mean, like back in the day, that was exactly how you got started as an artist, was copying. And similarly, any modern artist, they're seeing all these works of other artists, whether or not they're explicitly copying them. So it's not entirely clear to me that, having an AI use that as source material is really any different than people using it as source material. But it's definitely a big conversation to be having. Yeah.
How secure is it, and does it give you your results in a printable form? Hello, where'd
um,
Adam go?
yes. Sorry, I dropped
Oh,
something.
there you are.
So the security, I have no idea what the security is. I'm not sure it really comes into play that much because it's something that anyone can interact with. It's a public service. You just have to sign up for an account. Um, and one of the things we saw with DALL-E, and the same thing is happening with ChatGPT, is that once the cat is out of the bag, lots of other companies are showing that they can do it too. So we're seeing lots of this kind of service showing up. What was your second thing? Does it? Yes, it actually just types out your response. It's like talking to someone, through chat.
So you need to
So
select it all at the end and then save that to your clipboard and then
if you
save as
wanted
a
to,
file.
yes, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think you would. I would like it. I'm a musician. I'd like it to write me a song in the style of the Beatles in the late 60s. Would it do
You
that?
know, yeah, it's worth a try because it undoubtedly knows the lyrics to all the Beatles songs.
Yeah,
So
with the same kind of melody and song patterns.
Now, I don't know. I don't believe it does anything with actual music yet,
Hmm.
but certainly the lyrics it should be able to do. And again, they'll have the Beatles would have, particularly in the late '60s, would have had a very specific style
Right.
that would have, kind of would probably be able to do. So yeah, no, I think that it's a ton of fun to play with, and I strongly encourage everyone to go find it, try it out. So
Is it
yeah,
free?
Steve. Oh yes, it's free. You just have to sign up for an OpenAI account, which is free. Uh, yeah,
One question
Stephen.
I would have, we're talking about general, you know, kind of uh, arts and uh, you know, general communications. How
Right.
far can you get into a technically, complicated subject before it starts to kind of show that it really can't handle? I mean, you could write a quantum mechanical original paper from it. So
Right.
where is that line of how technical can it competently do something?
Well, so here's the
That
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, here's the interesting thing. So the way that most people play with it is you ask it to do something and it does, and maybe you fiddle with what you've asked it to see if you can get it to do different responses. But the people who I've seen who find who figure out that you get the most like compelling stuff out of it is they actually keep probing it and asking it to do slightly different things or to expand on what it just said or whatnot. And so they keep getting it to do kind of more and more interesting stuff
So you
by
put it in
pushing the conversation.
the direction of where you think
Yeah,
you'd like
right.
some perhaps original
Yep.
thought or creativity to actually take place.
Right. And it's not, perhaps original is not quite the right term. It's more that you're pushing it to bring more different kinds of things into the conversation. So one of the questions, I think, is like, we're really good. Humans are great at this, right? You can say, I mean, the question you just had, and I'll know what you're talking about. So computers are really pretty bad at that's called state. So knowing what was said before. And ChatGPT is pretty limited in terms of state. It doesn't have great state because it's very hard to keep track of that kind of thing. But it does have some, and so that's how you can kind of try to continue the conversation so you're constantly kind of nudging it to give you something slightly different or more about this, and that can result in some of the best things. I've seen some people do really interesting uh, get interesting stuff out of it, and when they talked about how they did it, it was clear that it wasn't easy, right? So it's actually sort of the same as with DALL-E, is that some people are creating truly impressive artworks with it, And when you see what the prompts they've come up with to get it to make those artworks, it's not something you ever would have guessed in a million years. I mean, they've spent hours and hours working on these prompts. Yeah, Judy.
There's a book that's been out 10 years. It's called Copyright and Copy
Yeah.
Wrong.
One
And
of
you
the
might
things
want to
that
take a
I've
look
found,
at it.
oh,
Excuse me?
sorry, Bill.
Bill, from now on, raise your hand to be
Yeah.
I did.
recognized. Judy, no, well, I mean, okay, but Judy
Sorry, I
had
think
her
There's
hand
a
raised.
bottom
yeah.
thing down on the screen that says react, and you can raise your hand and get whatever. But
Oh, let's
I
take a look,
have
see what
been
happens.
using
I have that
an
hand.
app
Yeah.
called Wonder AI,
Mm-hmm.
using photographs or just you can type in your words and it will give you an image.
Yep.
One of the
Yep.
things that I've done is now with that, I can choose a source image, which when I do it, I try to use one of my own images to start
Mm-hmm.
with. But something I have tried to do is not save the prompts that I used to create it, only because then that is a unique image. It's
Ah,
it's
interesting.
something different because with like Wonder AI, um, I can choose a source image, I can use a style, and there are a whole bunch of styles that are pre-programmed. You know, watercolor, oils, all fantasy, all sorts of things. But I can also use in the style of another artist. So
Yeah.
there are enough different things that I can put into it that I think what I'm getting out is
Yeah.
definitely unique. But I actually did an image for my company's Christmas card this year
Oh,
using
nice.
the app, and I got the question back saying we should credit you with the image, and I said no, don't, because this is really still in the artistic photography, whatever, it is a very sore subject.
Yeah. And that's what I say. I mean, Bill, you're absolutely right to bring up, copyright stuff,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
because it huge.
what I wanted to bring up was there's a book that's out for 10 years. It's called Copyright and Copy Wrong. And it is a study of what's wrong with how we do copyright now. And it goes
Yeah.
very much into all the things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
book's probably out of print, but you can find it remaindered somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Clifton. Where's Clifton?
Cliff, Cliff Bailey, unmute yourself. Cliff, unmute yourself.
I'm not seeing him at all. Okay.
Well, I'm
Well,
I'm sending him an unmute request.
Here we go. Sounds like it might be another way to create passwords.
um,
Going back
I
to the
would say
earlier discussion.
I would say that would be dangerous because it's an algorithm, so it's likely to work the same way for multiple people. So you don't want to say give me a five word passphrase, for instance, because someone else would say give me a 5 word passphrase and it might get exactly the same one. There's sort of no way to tell, and it's unfortunately likely because it's not has no reason to think that it should give you a different one. It's just going to pick, 5 word passphrase. I start with this, and then I get boom, 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 boom. Next one's there. Now, where I think we are going with some of these, it's actually pretty obvious that um, excuse me, that ChatGPT needs to be melded with a search engine. So, and it's actually going to happen. The word is that Microsoft is a big investor in OpenAI, and the Microsoft's Bing search engine has never done diddly compared to Google. Um, And so Microsoft is talking about, coming up with a ChatGPT, I don't know, somehow interface. I'm not sure quite what they're planning, and they haven't said actually. It's just rumors at the moment. But the difference between ChatGPT and the search engine is search engines care deeply about what the best responses are. And so they're not perfect. I mean, that you could have a web page, for instance, which has incorrect facts on it, but lots and lots and lots of people link to it, and et cetera, such that it still ranks high in the best category. But most of the time, if something is bad, it doesn't show up well in search engines, because the search engines have spent years and years and years figuring out how to distinguish good and bad pages. So if you can combine the quality capabilities of a search engine with the chat capabilities of ChatGPT, might be some really interesting stuff coming with that. All right, Steve, then Bob.
Yeah. I I'm kind of curious about what are the edges or the limits or the, you know, what can this kind of format be used for in the sense of pure logic? I mean, could it handle Boolean logic problems, or
No, no, it can't, because there's no thinking there at all. It's merely putting words together. So
and
so
so it
that's it.
probably couldn't do anything in pure math either.
No, and actually, one of the fascinating examples when we wrote about this is you can ask it to do math, right? You can say, what is 5782 plus 3926, and it will give you an
Uh,
answer, but it may not be right.
just the most common wrong answer on the internet.
Just like, yeah, the way the algorithm found that these two numbers, when they appear, you have this one and then the next one appears. Okay, well, the next thing that is most likely to appear is this other thing, but there's no addition going on. It's not actually calculating. So yeah, so that's what I'm saying is we have to really think of this as kind of a search engine that's doing a bad job in some ways, and not really. I mean, like a search engine, Google knows that you can actually do math in Google, and it will give you the right answer, because Google just special cased that search. It basically put a calculator into the search field. And so ChatGPT, things like that will be happening. There's just no question that it will be modified so that when it sees you doing math, it will just send it to Wolfram AI or something like that. Wolfram Alpha,
Yeah,
sorry. So that it can
yeah,
do high end math, but it's not going to do it itself. It's going to have to be sending it off. So, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that Google search engine has a very high bias for example, Wikipedia, which can be easily manipulated, and therefore, if you have a Markov chain process where it's based on the entire web, what word follows every other word, that is not manipulatable in the same way. There's a certain inherent integrity to having a large data set.
It, yeah, I mean, right. It's true. Right. It's true that its data set, it may not result in accurate results, but it is probably difficult to manipulate it. It also may be biased. I mean, one of the things that we run into with all of these situations is they reflect their data sets. So I mean, one of the problems the image things have had over time is, well, turns out there's more white people posting stuff, and therefore black people don't show up as well. And that kind of thing is, ChatGPT tries pretty hard to prevent people from asking things that might reveal such biases in its data set, but it's not impossible. Um, what was I going to say? There was another interesting example that someone did, which again, sort of shows the where you can run into problems. Which is, it was this guy's daughter needed to write an essay about separation of powers in government, and so and when ChatGPT did this, it was with regard to John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, or actually, it was specifically with regard to John Locke, I think. And no, I'm sorry, Hobbes. I'm getting my people mixed up. But basically, it wrote a perfectly reasonable essay that was completely wrong. It just so happens that Locke and Hobbes are often talked about at the same time, and so it just pulled words, you know, from that were related to the other one because they were both appearing in the same source material. So, so again, very confident sounding, very cleanly written, all that, but completely and utterly wrong. So, one of the things that I think is going to actually play into this is that we're going to see a lot of, frankly, poor content marketing material. So companies will say, "Oh, this is much easier than hiring a writer to write stuff for our company blog." And so they'll get stuff they put on their company blog, and it will be wrong, for lack of a better term. And but because it's wrong and it's out there, it will start feeding wrong information back into the system. I mean, in essence, we're going to have bots writing for bots. So, because I mean, basically Google and Bing and all the search engines, those are just bots going out and crawling text and bringing it back and evaluating it. So it's going to be a fascinating scenario. Yeah, Bill.
It's going to be another example of the Geico transform, garbage in, garbage out.
Very much so, but I think we as people are going to have to get better at identifying stuff that's just completely random in terms of actually having a human involved in the entire process. So, all right, any more stuff about ChatGPT or AI that people want to chat about? I got one more topic we can discuss for a bit, I think.
With
Well,
ChatGPT, can you, do you type into it or does it,
Yes,
okay, you can't
yes.
talk to
yeah,
it?
So,
I have something that might be interesting.
yes,
Enver?
In
Enver.
Burma, yeah, I started playing with it yesterday, and I started with a with a real question. My distant cousin's daughter is studying marketing, and we got into what's marketing going to be like in a few years. So that's the type of question I posed to ChatGPT, and I got a very good answer. Then I posed it other questions, which requires a scientific mind, and it came back, well, I won't go into specifics, but basically it said, well, most people believe this, but there's a few others that don't. So then I wrote back, I said, well, numbers don't matter. When Earth was flat, when Earth was considered flat, if one scientist could prove that it's not, it can't argue that sort of question. It doesn't even consider it. And
Yeah.
so I gave it 3 or 4 examples, and I've come to where I think I can use it very nicely, and where I would not use it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the uses it's going to be put to, and may already have because people move so fast with this. And Donna, your question reminded me, is that people will often talk to a computer through a keyboard um, in ways that they won't other people. That it feels very safe and anonymous in some ways. And this goes back to the very dawn of computing, when I think it was at MIT, a researcher wrote a program called ELIZA. And ELIZA was mimicking a certain type of psychiatric treatment, a particular style where you tended the therapist would tend to ask questions back to the person. So, person might say, "Oh, I'm feeling sad today," and Eliza would say, "Oh, why are you feeling sad?" "Oh, I'm feeling sad because my mother died." "Oh, how does your mother dying make you feel?" Just it would just be constantly asking, even though this was the 60s, right? This was tremendously primitive. People got into it. I mean, they just kept talking to it, and they actually attributed personality and emotion and all this to the chatbots. And I mean, chatbots have come a tremendously long way since then, but ChatGPT is by far the most sophisticated of that. And I think that we will see in essence, therapy bots, which people become, completely attached to, because you can tell it anything and it will always talk to you. The other use that this came up a few years ago, there was a big New York Times article about it. Is kids, or well, frankly, anyone who are fairly severely on the autism spectrum, often want to just ask question after question after question after question. And the woman who wrote the article, her son was autistic, and she was saying that basically she loved Siri because Siri would answer her son's questions forever. and and so and ChatGPT is going to be just another step in that direction of, for the people who just need to talk at all times, they will have someone to talk to. Yeah, Donna.
When I have a problem with my Apple Card account and I use the chat feature to talk to somebody at Goldman Sachs or whoever is monitoring that, or when I have a problem with my Verizon cell phone account, it sounds like the responses that I get from them initially are something very similar to what you're describing. Is that
Yes,
possible before they
it
get
is.
to a person?
Absolutely. It is not just possible, it is almost certainly happening.
Oh,
And I mean, I don't have any specific information about that, but basically it's super easy to come up with a simple chatbot. Like with Goldman Sachs or Verizon or whatnot, they know what the questions are going to be, right?
yeah,
They get
yeah,
the same questions all the time, so they can actually have a system which just analyzes what you've written and prompts you a few more times to get to the point where, okay, we don't know the answer automatically, we have to have a person take over, or maybe we can just solve it. So yeah,
huh,
I mean, to give you an
well,
idea of where AI is going, you know how you get like robocalls, and sometimes the conversation. I mean, most people don't actually ever talk to them, but sometimes if you get these calls and you're like, it doesn't quite sound, it's not quite right. You actually, I mean, there are actually systems that will do, telemarketing via AI because it's a script, right? They just
right,
have to stay on script. They don't, it's all recorded. I mean, a person recorded it, no question, but the computer is feeding the right bits in place to keep you talking. So,
yeah.
I said, brave new world. But okay, so let's switch to something that's cooler. Cooler yet, and even been more on the positive side, which with the iPhone 14, Apple came out with a new feature called Emergency SOS via satellite. And you want to talk about magic. I mean, basically, Apple's newest iPhones, which are just iPhones, they are not satellite phones. They don't have special antennas or anything like that. If you've seen satellite kind of bigger antennas, Apple has made it so that the iPhone 14 can actually communicate with satellites in low Earth orbit, and it's pretty limited in what you can send. That's why it's emergency SOS. So it only works if you are completely without cellular connectivity. And you have to kind of hold your phone up, and it walks you through like pointing it at the satellite. You actually have to point at a satellite, which is kind of fun. Um, but when this came out in November, I guess it was, I tested it a little bit, and it's just impressive. It is really impressive what Apple can do has been able to do with this. So, I'll talk about it more. But yeah, Max, what's your question?
Uh, and Android just announced that on Android phones coming up, they're going to be using technology the same way, except where Apple is limited to making emergency calls, that the Android phones are supposed to be able to send a regular text, so that you will be able to text and communicate the same you would be with if you want a cellular network.
Yeah, so basically, what you can tell what's hang on, Stephen, for a second. So what Apple's doing, Apple was very careful in how they introduced it. So when you use emergency SOS via satellite, it is texting, and you can say what you want, but it's going only to emergency responders, basically to a dispatcher. It's just like if you called 911. And the reason for that is the amount of bandwidth that you have to a satellite, to and from a satellite, is infinitesimally small. So Apple even does it. So what they do is when you start one of these emergency SOS calls, it actually runs you through a kind of a script where like it's the phone is talking to you and extracting information from you to be able to compress that and send that up to the emergency responder. And then once you actually start the conversation with the emergency responder, then it's sending what you have. But you can see, I mean, you'll be typing, a couple of words, and you press send, and it takes minutes sometimes to send. I mean, it is not fast. So that's the beginning of this, but you can see where it's going because you can buy these devices, like it's called an InReach from Garmin, which are satellite communicators, and they're just little standalone devices, and they do allow you to text anyone you want, um, but they also charge quite a lot for that service. And what Apple is probably doing, or almost certainly doing with emergency SOS, is they're just rolling it out slowly, because keep in mind, there are millions of iPhones that could do this, whereas Garmin doesn't have to. They don't sell that many InReach devices, comparatively speaking. So my suspicion is that by the time Apple starts charging for it, which they've said we all get 2 years free now, by the time they start charging for it, they will have exactly that feature, and it may be just next year. I'm sure that it's just a slow rollout to make sure their systems work the way they think. With Android, yeah, again, once the cat's out of the bag, everyone's going to do it. How well it will actually work with different phones and different services will remain to be seen. But it was inevitable that as soon as Apple announced this feature, that the Android ecosystem would get it as well. So yes, Stephen.
Uh, I was just wondering. I thought I might have heard that actually somebody had used this on the news and it was like rescued after an accident or something. So,
I yeah, I believe there have been some examples at this point. Not vast numbers of them, but they have happened. As with any new feature, well, actually, sorry, emergency SOS. I'm confusing my features. The other thing that Apple introduced in the last set of iPhones and Apple Watches and stuff like that is crash detection, and which is pretty cool. I
maybe,
mean, it's a great
maybe
feature.
that
Don't
was
get me
it.
wrong.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with crash detection, the problem with crash
Uh-huh.
detection is it turns out it's fairly easy to fool it. And by fairly easy, I mean like if you're skiing and you fall down, you have stopped really fast. If you're in a roller coaster, you're accelerating and all that kind of thing very quickly. And so
Uh,
those have been the things. But Apple's going to improve that. Emergency SOS, you have to really invoke it manually and intentionally, and it takes a while. So there's two ways to test it, and I actually encourage everyone to try this if you have an iPhone 14. When you go into settings, emergency SOS, there's a demo mode you can flip into, and it's absolutely worth trying that, because if you ever are in an emergency where you don't have cellular access, you'll know how to use it. You won't be completely clueless. So go try the demo. The other thing that Apple did, which is sort of weird, and again is just trying to do the 1.0 version, get it, see how it works, is you can actually, if you are without cellular access, you can send your location to Find My, so that if someone were to look at where you were in Find My, they could see that you're in the middle of nowhere with no reception. And this does work. Where I live in Ithaca, you don't have to go very far to be able to find no service. So I only had to drive like 7 miles to where I was certain there was no service, and there was indeed no service. And tested this, and it works just fine. The only problem with it is it's sort of useless, because someone has to think to go look for you. It's only useful if, like, yeah, you've been missing for a while, and let's go see if we can find him. Oh, look, and you look on Find My, he's over here. Um, what there isn't yet, and I said what I think Apple will be doing, is you may have noticed in messages there's an option to send my location to someone else. That's what you need. You could do that because, like, I mean, think about it. there's a lot of situations which are not emergency situations where you might want to communicate, and that's partly why, as you were saying, that they're going to be able to do texting. But you know, my wife and I, we ride bikes, and it's pretty easy to be, well, it's pretty easy to be in a service where there's no cell access around here on a bike. And so just imagine you get a flat somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Well, the easy way to get a flat fixed, and the way all bikers pretty much do these days, is you carry a cell phone and you call someone. You don't bother to try to fix your flat, or worse things like you break a spoke or whatever. So it's easy to imagine a situation where you just want to say, "Come get me." Um, you don't want to call emergency services; that would be embarrassing and overkill. And so I think we'll see Apple doing that. Probably certainly by next fall, if not sooner, once they get a little bit more experience with the system. So, yeah, Judy.
I had a situation not too long ago where trying to get into a really well sealed Amazon package that my Apple Watch thought I had fallen, and I had warnings, and I was able to tell them, no, I did not fall. I am fine. But there are some, I can't remember what the heck I did to make it think
I was going to say that
that I
sounds like a
was in
really well sealed
danger.
package.
But it kind of made me feel good in that, I mean, my daughter lives with me, but our schedules are totally different. So it's really comforting to me to have the Apple Watch
Yeah,
with kind of that oversight.
yeah. So Apple has obviously promoted a number of stories, that well, wow, people's lives were saved or whatever. And I mean, not that I don't believe them in any stretch, but it's always closer to home when it's sort of a friend of a friend. And last winter, my in-laws were telling us a story about someone they knew in Ithaca who was walking down by the lake in a place called Cass Park, and it was icy, and he was elderly. He slipped and he hit his head and he was knocked unconscious. And his Apple Watch called emergency services, and they came before anyone else found him. It was very fast because of where he was. It was probably 10 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. But it was cold, and he had hit his head, and all those other things like that would have been fatal or could have been fatal if he hadn't had the Apple Watch. It certainly would have been more problematic than it was. So, yeah, these things are real, and at this point, I mean, Apple Watches are good devices. I like mine, and I encourage people to get them. But certainly, anyone who's worried about falling, or the crash detection, again, I don't anticipate being in a crash. But boy, if I am and I'm not able to call for help, I'd sure like it if my watch and my phone did. you know so in this sense, it's sort of cheap insurance. And I say cheap not because the Apple Watch and the iPhone are cheap, but because you'll probably want them anyway, right? It's just a cheap to have the extra feature. So, yeah.
Bob?
Bob. Yeah.
I am going to be getting an Apple Watch shortly. I'm also a skier, and I'm not a perfect skier. I do fall. So what happens? I mean, I fall, I get up. Uh, is
So,
every time I fall because I took the turn too fast or something like that? Do you have to go through some sort of routine?
it does have to detect a certain kind of fall. It was surprising that Judy was saying that it went off while she was, trying to open a package, because normally it's pretty. You were you were stabbing the package. Okay. So yeah. So what I would say is that it's probably not going to have false alarms that much, because I mean, first of all, the fall detection's been out for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, right? So Apple's had a long time to adjust the algorithm. They certainly know that people fall while skiing. That
Well,
said,
I ski fast.
right.
I don't just kind of tip over.
But even still, but similarly, lots of people do that. I mean, that's what downhill skiing's
Okay.
about. So,
But if
so I'm
skiing
sure that
has to tip over, you may need help.
right. And so the question is, basically, you could leave it on, see if you get a false positive. Hopefully, you'll be able to turn it off before it's a problem. It does give you warning, and let you cancel the call.
Okay.
But the other thing is, you could just turn it off when you're skiing. You're like, I know I'm gonna fall, or I know it's certainly likely that I'm gonna fall, so I will just turn the feature off until I get back off the slopes. Only
Or
problem
if
with that
I'm,
is, you're likely to
well,
slip on the ice while you're wearing ski boots, right? So
well, if you're skiing with people, it's
yes,
less of a problem. If you were off by yourself, you have any sense you not doing the 40, 50 miles an hour,
and
but you probably want your fall detection on if you're skiing by yourself.
and similarly, like if you don't wear a helmet, that would increase your, be making more likely to want to keep the feature on. Oh, I don't like wearing a helmet; they're too constricting or something. Well, you're more likely to bang your head then. So, keep the feature on.
Well, the hope
So
is
yeah,
not you. They don't have a lot of hope because if they're not smart enough to wear a helmet, they're probably not going to be smart enough to handle the rest of this very well.
yeah. Well, there is that. So, Max, what do you got?
I was just going to, excuse me, I was just going to say what you just said, which is that you can simply turn the feature off. However, my kids gave me an Apple Watch before the fall detection feature was there, and I upgraded my watch because of the fall detection feature, because I do live alone and I'm now over 50. And so and I hear laughter in the background. Um, and my friend of mine had his watch, and I asked him how it worked, and he told me that he had regularly gotten false alarms um, from doing things like chopping in the kitchen. And as a matter
Oh,
of fact,
interesting.
I was wondering if my watch actually worked because I never got an alarm when I did a number of things. And and the first time it did work, and I knew it worked, was when I was in a snowstorm in a car and ended up hitting my steering wheel very hard. And Bob, one of the things you were talking about in skiing is that being able to turn this off, you're going to be wearing gloves and parka and all that sort of stuff when you ski. And that was it was cold. I was wearing a jacket. I keep my car cold when I drive. And this alarm went off and called 911 and connected with 911. I didn't hear it because my watch was covered with my jacket. When I pulled in and stopped, it was the first time I heard the 911 operator asking if I was all right. And then I
Mm,
realized what had happened and I talked to the 911 operator. Interestingly enough, by the way, I told him what had happened, and his question was there was a pause, and then he said, if you were not all right, would you be able to tell me? And I
yeah,
thought about that a second and said, yes, yes, I would. I think the 911 operators are being trained to ask questions now to try to determine whether someone who's called 911 and then says they don't need 911 might be under duress.
yeah.
Um, but subsequently, my watch has gone off with that alarm several times. In one instance, I actually fell when I was running. I was okay. And the other times it was a false alarm, and I was able to quickly indicate that I had not fallen and all was well. By the way, another thing about the fall detection feature on the watch is if you are under 65, that's a feature that you have to turn on in settings. If you're over 65, based on the data, biographic data that you put in, it is turned on automatically when you start using
Oh,
the watch.
interesting. I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Are there
You're
Well, you
different
absolutely
you
correct
can
levels?
about
still turn it off, Craig, can't you?
Yes, you can still
I'm
turn
over,
it on,
yeah,
but
Are there
I'm over
different levels
65.
of sensitivity
no, but
for
when you set it up and use it initially, with the watch. Even if you didn't turn the feature on, well, it is turned on automatically when you set up the watch if you indicate that you're over 65. If you're under 65, you can turn it on, and I certainly encourage the people I know who are under 65 who have the watch. I encourage them to turn it on. And yes, you can still, even if you're over 65, you can turn off the feature. It's just that it's turned on automatically. So you can turn it off, turn it back on when you need it. So if you're getting on a roller coaster, or if you're in a demolition derby, or if you that happens to be your hobby, or you're skiing, in order not to annoy the EMS services, it's best to turn it off.
Donna, just to answer your question, no, you can't change the sensitivity. It's a very, I mean, with all of the fall detection and the crash detection, they are extremely complicated algorithms. They are not like, it's not simple. Oh, the watch decelerated really quickly. You know, it's way more complicated than Apple. Apple actually talked a little bit about that when they were introducing crash detection. I forget exactly what they said, but something like, it was, a million hours of training or something like that in the AI that does that,
Uh,
because it's attempting to put together a whole lot of data to identify this is a crash. And it turns out, like, demolition derbies, those are crashes. And roller coaster was an interesting one that people hadn't anticipated, because usually you don't stop that quickly, but the accelerations were so fast and the noise was there because it also listens. I mean, again, car crashes sound like something, so it puts a whole lot of details together to come up with that. And the same is more or less true with the fall detection, although it doesn't have like sound and whatnot to go for in the same way. But I just do want to emphasize, back up what you were saying about Max, about when you call 911. It's very easy on an iPhone, or an Apple Watch, if you have the emergency SOS feature turned on. If you just like press, there, I've just pressed my volume button and my I can't really see it, but my volume button and my side button, and now I've got, slide to make an emergency call. And there's a setting where if you press the side button 5 times, it'll call emergency right away, that kind of stuff. It's easy to do that. And my father once, middle of the night, he was, had to do something with his phone. My parents listened to audiobooks at night, and he did that. He pressed the 2 buttons because he was just he was just squeezing and not really paying attention to where his other finger was, and he called 911 accidentally. And the 911 operator called back immediately, and he's like, "Oh no, there's no problem. Sorry, I just did it accidentally." And then 20 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and it's the police officers, because they can't take your word for it. They just can't. You are unfortunately not a reliable source, for a variety of reasons. And so, yeah, they're like, you know, and basically, he's like, and can we see, can your wife come up, please? They wanted to see everyone, to make sure everyone was okay. And I was like, my parents were horribly embarrassed, of course, but the officers were like, nope, sorry, this is what we got to do, and it is better that we do it this way, and everyone agreed, but my parents were still horribly embarrassed. Alrighty, well, any last questions about LastPass, ChatGPT, emergency SOS, or anything else? I'm actually a sucker for answering questions.
Will
What is the
Apple
name?
stock go up again?
Sorry, what was
Thank
that,
you
Bob?
very much.
Will Apple stock go up again?
Yes, Apple stock will go up again. Um, yeah, well, I mean, talk about tech giants taking it on the chin recently. It does seem like it's been bad, but I mean, it's so frustrating because you see what affects stock prices, and so often it's just not real. Like, yeah, Apple's got some challenges in terms of supply chain stuff and shipping stuff and whatnot, but that doesn't mean like the company is actually not worth as much as it used to be. So, any event, it's all
but what's
perception.
going on in China with them relaxing the restrictions on workers? The whole thing can start to flow again. So if the problem was that they were unable to sell a lot of products, that's going to be mitigated now.
Should be helping. So, yeah,
Yeah.
Max.
I was going to just mention something that I think everybody should know um, because it's caused me a great deal of trouble over the past couple of months. Um, I had a MacBook Pro. I still have a MacBook Pro. Doesn't do anything because I was upgrading to the latest operating system. It's been about a month ago, I guess now, and in doing so, it appeared to be upgrading, but when it restarted, the progress bar only went to about 50%, and then it stopped, and then I got a seven little language error message saying you've encountered a problem, restart. I did that, and after the third or fourth time, I figured out restarting wasn't going to solve the problem. And so I was looking at to see what I might be able to do. I tried to start it from, excuse me, from the recovery, and then I got another um, uh, graphic and a text box that I did not recognize, and so my next stop was to the Apple Store.
Mm.
Uh, where they advised me that the graphic that I was seeing and the text box was asking for a firmware password. I've never set a firmware password on any of my computers. I
Mm.
think it's not worth it's
Yeah.
not worth the possible difficulty. However, that they said that's what was set, and I tried, my administrator password and that sort of thing. Nothing worked. So I said that's not a real problem for me. They said there was no way they could get in to diagnose the problem with my computer, and so the only thing they could do is erase it.
Ugh.
And and I said that wasn't a problem for me because I keep both a carbon copy cloner backup and also a time machine backup. And I said that's not a problem. Erase it, and I will restart. We do it again. Um, the next thing was they asked me for where my original receipt for the computer was, and I said, say what? Well, if I have one, it was probably emailed to me, and it's probably on that computer. And they said it's Apple policy not to wipe the computer without having the original receipt. Um, so I went back on my old MacBook Pro, seeing if I could not find that. I searched for the serial number of my computer, and I finally came up with the receipt for the Apple Care that I purchased at the same time I purchased the computer. That wasn't good enough. The
Oh.
fact that I had the Apple Care receipt showing the computer serial number wasn't good enough. The fact that under my attached my my Apple ID, where it lists all the um, Apple devices I have, which are many, by the way, um, that wasn't good enough. Nothing would do except the original receipt. As a consequence, I have a MacBook Pro that is only good. Well, it's not even good as a paperweight because it takes up too much space on the desk. Um, so, in continuing to research this, I found out that it can be erased by using a certain piece of software, and that you can go in and erase it that way. But I can't get Apple to do that, of course, and I can't get anybody who is an Apple certified repair facility to do it, because if they do it, there's a possibility then they would lose their contract with Apple. So, it's configurator software, I think, is the name of it. One of our members has been trying to do it for me. He has been unsuccessful to this point. Um, the Coincidentally, I might add, I was purchasing a new Apple Watch, and they asked me if I wanted an emailed receipt or a physical receipt, and I said, "You must be freaking crazy." That question, after I've been here arguing with you, print it out and give it to me and put it in my hot little hands. So, if you buy an Apple product, I recommend that you get a written receipt, or if you get an email receipt, to print it out right away and keep it separate from your devices to save you the heartache, pain that I am going through right now with Apple. There have been a number of reasons why I've been um, increasingly less happy with Apple over the last year or two, and this is the icing on the cake. But I'm so enmeshed in the Apple ecosphere, having purchased many Apple TVs for myself and my kids, and Apple devices, et cetera, that that I'm not ready to get out of that. But keep your receipts, folks. Keep physical receipts and maintain them separate from your devices because you may need them.
Well,
Why don't
Well,
we
the
take the
adjunct to
last
that
two
is to
questions?
the
Why don't
adjunct
we
to
take
that
the
is to
last
know
two
that
questions from Carolyn and Steve and then wrap it up? Okay.
just in addition to what Max was saying, uh, you the if the device you have now, if the computer you have now, you don't have such a receipt of find it when you can. Your computer is working. Make that a top thing to do. Find it and print it out, and then you won't
Yeah.
get stuck where Max got stuck.
That's well worth a folder in the desk drawer.
Okay,
Yes.
Carolyn.
I have a quick question. Does everyone feel like they're to get open their mail that it's taking longer for it to open and to fill and to do
yes,
anything? Is that
yes.
is that the G5 or is that what is going on with mail that it just takes forever to load whatever it is?
So, Carolyn, the question, the situation is going to be different for every person,
Okay.
and it's going to depend a lot on the specifics. So, for instance, what email program do you use? Do you use Apple Mail?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And what service do you use? What's your email address? Is it iCloud or Gmail?
It's a Verizon. It's AOL
Verizon?
mail. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, and then the other question would be, do you keep a lot of mail in your account?
No, I delete it all. I delete trash. I delete junk.
So,
I'm a deleter.
so the most likely situation, um, there's a couple of possibilities, but what I would try first, and if you can find someone who is technical, maybe more technical, to help with this kind of thing, is there are ways of rebuilding Apple Mail's mailboxes? And because if it's taking a really long time, it shouldn't take a long time. It's just there's no reason for it to. And so if the mailboxes are corrupt or their indexes are messed up or things like that, that can slow things down. It's also possible just that the Verizon service is that the servers are being slow. And the way you could tell that is if other people, and Judy's nodding here, if other people who are using Verizon as well are seeing the same problem. With iCloud or Gmail, that's not going to be a problem. Those servers do not have issues. So, so
Mm.
that's where I would start to look first in terms of looking at Apple Mail first. Does Verizon have a web client where you can log in your web browser?
Yes,
Yes.
it does.
So that's
Verizon
another,
Verizon is no longer handling their own email. They changed that over a year ago, and
Okay.
it's now all been moved over to AOL. So AOL
right,
is
Mhm.
handling all of the Verizon email addresses. They didn't change the domain name, but they did change
the back end.
the servicing of that email.
So I mean, you would think that AOL would be used by enough people that they probably would have decent services, but it's still possible that that there's issues. Probably the speed is more related to something local then. And so you could try that. Another thing you could test as a way of, well, this again, it starts to get complicated. It depends on what you're comfortable with, but you could create a new account on your computer and then log in to your email with that account, which would basically give you a sort of another look at your email. It'd be the same email, it could be downloading it all from Verizon again, but if that was faster, that would tell you that the copy of mail on your other account, would have some issues in its internal data. So, um, One thing I did just want to finish though, on Max, your comment about there's a guy named, I don't know what his real name is. His internet name is Mr. Macintosh, and he does really good technical stuff. And he has an article on how to remove a Mac password using Apple Configurator 2. Sort of start to remove a firmware password. And that's exactly where I would go if I were you and in trying to get this done. It seems that basically you're just resetting the bridge OS in your MacBook Pro. So it might be worth taking a look at that if you can find it.
The name,
Max, do you
the
know
name,
how that happened? Because I don't want to do that to my MacBook Pro. Do you know how that happened?
how the firmware password got set?
Yeah,
Yes.
no.
I do
It
not
could
know
be
how it.
static electricity or something. Sometimes there's glitches in the firmware.
I have
I have
no
lit
idea. I have no
yeah,
idea
I
how
have
it happened.
literally never heard of a firmware set without someone doing it intentionally.
Nor
I,
nor have I.
Yeah, so I mean, as Bob says, cosmic rays, So don't worry about it, Carolyn. It's
Okay.
incredibly
Thank you.
unlikely.
Thank you.
Uh,
What is not
so
unlikely, though, is that you might have a problem upgrading the software, because that's where the problem all started, was when I was upgrading uh, to the latest operating system. And the same thing that happened, that has also happened with Apple's original. I'm not sure it's happened with the iPod Mini or the mini speakers, but with the original speakers, certainly there were many instances where the speakers simply became bricked when because they were automatically updating the software, and some of them, including one of mine, simply stopped working because when it was upgrading the software, there was an error. That device is now bricked. Apple takes no responsibility for that.
yeah. So to be clear, for whenever you're upgrading a Mac to a new version of, particularly a big version of the operating system, you should always make a backup before you start. Just
Which I did.
standard operating procedure,
Yeah,
because it's not likely, again, it's not likely that things will go wrong. They don't go wrong nearly all the time, but they can, and it's always better to have a backup, and you don't need a backup anyway, so make a backup and you're good. All right, Steve.
And 3 cheers for
I
carbon copy cloner.
Steve?
I was just wondering what was the name of your blog or your the info.
Oh, so the one that it's called Mr. Macintosh.
No, yours.
Oh, mine. I'm
Tidbits.
sorry. When I was, Tidbits, Tidbits. So if you go to
Okay,
tidbits.com, you'll find us.
great. Okay, thank you. Right,
Sorry.
great. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
All right. Bill, did you have one more thing?
Essentially saying I've been very successful with carbon copy cloner
Yeah.
CCC over the years. And I also maintain at least 2 backups, one of which lives in the shed. And once a week I go and swap them out and do it that way. So far, so
Yeah.
good.
No, that's a great approach. So there's basically, I recommend, if you want to be really good, what I recommend for backups, and this is what I do, is you have something making a duplicate. Carbon Copy Cloner, Super Duper, the best known ones. You can also use a program called ChronoSync. There's others, but those are the 3 best known. You want to use Time Machine. Time Machine is built into the Mac OS, and it works well as far as making versioned backups, so that if something happens to a file, you can go back and and versions to find out what you need. And then the third type of backup that I always recommend is an off-site backup. And what Bill's doing by putting his backup in the shed is essentially taking it off-site. So, if his house, a pipe were to break in the house and flood his computer, or if someone were to break in and steal the computer and the disks that are next to it, the backup in the shed is going to be safe. Not 100% good against like the earthquake, but you guys live in Virginia, not California, so wildfires, earthquakes, less of a problem that way. What I
Yeah,
do for offsite
but I had an earthquake 10 years ago
back,
here
okay,
in Virginia.
so
Cracked the chimney.
so
Okay.
yes,
Happy New Year,
um,
everybody.
what I recommend for offsite backups is an internet backup service for most people. And part of the reason is that you don't have to remember to go move your backup drive every week or whatever. It just backs up over the internet. And the service I like there is Backblaze. And so you pay them whatever I forget what the amount is per month, $8 a month or $9 a month, something like that. And then your computer backs up over the internet so that no matter what could happen to your computer, your backups are always safe in the cloud and you can
How's
recover
that
them
different
in the future.
from Apple's iCloud?
What's that name again, Adam? What's the name?
It's Backblaze, Backblaze. So,
Thank you.
and they're good. And Donna, it's different than iCloud. I mean, it's sort of the same concept as iCloud, but it's an actual backup program. And so if you're copying data to iCloud Drive, for instance, that's not bad. And it does if it's there's one copy on your computer and one copy on iCloud Drive, that's helpful, but it's not a backup. A backup you don't have to think about. It just happens and it backs up everything. And that way you don't have to remember to run it or make
Oh,
sure that you put the file there. We as people, we're lousy at this. Computers, very good at doing the same thing over and over and over again. That's why you want to make sure your backups are automated with a real backup program.
does it
And
back up
Backblaze,
software as well?
yes, yes,
Oh,
precisely. So Backblaze is just doing that all for you, and it doesn't back up absolutely everything. For instance, it doesn't try to back up Mac OS because there's no reason for it to. You can reinstall Mac OS from Apple. It doesn't try to back up your apps because they can be really, really huge, which would be slow to back up over the internet. And again, you can download them again. You own these apps. You have the accounts to download Creative Cloud or whatever. So it's only backing up the data on your computer that is irreplaceable otherwise. And particularly when you get into the situation of, again, like California where there's wildfires, you don't want to mess around with those. So, Bill.
right. Okay.
Yeah, I tend to use huge disk for backup, and I partition them. And then carbon copy cloner run takes a while the first time, but after that, it only backs up what's been changed. So you can have your tons of applications once they're backed up once. After
Yep.
that, unless it changes, it, it
Yep.
it's smart enough to know not to do it again.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the case. And that's the same thing with Time Machine. The first backup is slow, subsequent ones are
Hmm.
fast. And that's why I recommend these three types, right? Because so carbon copy cloners is really good if you need to restore your entire drive because, something happened, you had to get a new drive or a new computer or something like that. Time Machine is good if you need to get a file from last
Hmm.
Thursday, or even a folder containing a gigabyte of files from last Thursday because changes have been made since and you don't want those changes. And then Backblaze is really good if something horrible goes wrong and like all your local copies are messed up. You would never restore from Backblaze preferentially. There's no reason to.
Hmm.
It's always faster to work with a disk, but that's the saving your butt in case something really bad happens to everything else.
What about making a disk image of your entire computer and then putting it out in the shed every week or something? Does that sound
You,
right? Sound good?
you could do that, but that's
Um,
basically what Carbon Copy Cloner is doing. It's basically making a copy of the entire thing on a regular basis and then moving it outside. Um, Again, you don't want to do this manually because you will be busy, you will forget, you will do it wrong. It doesn't matter. Something will go wrong. Always take the person out of the backup process.
Huh.
no, I
Okay.
have mine. You can program carbon copy cloner to back up anything you want as often as you want.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
if you want to run hourly backups, you can. In my case, I run them once a week for three different sources. But it's your choice as to how you do it, but it's automatic. If I walk away from the computer, it'll turn the computer on and make the backup.
Okay, well,
All righty.
we're so grateful to Adam for generously giving of his time, and I would again recommend Tidbits to all of you, and we wish him safe survival of the winter in Ithaca. I'll be there on February 4th, so I'll be joining you there. And why don't we stop the recording and let Adam go home in peace? Although it looks